All right, well, we are back to work on the C6 competition drift car build. I am more excited than ever to hammer down on this thing and get it done. I am so ready to start driving this car and competing in it, especially after this last round. We went up to Riverside for the $50,000 shootout. A bunch of Pro 1 drivers, Pro 1 cars. It was a very, very fast field. And at the end of the day, the Ellis Miata just got a little outpaced. You know, we put everything she had in her, you know. We threw the kitchen sink at it, and it just wasn't quite enough. It really wasn't. And that's, you know, really the whole reason why we're building this car. So it's definitely lit more of a fire under me to do whatever it takes to get this thing done by next round. So that being said, we have a lot of really exciting parts coming in the next day or two. Really the last big things that we need for this car. Most of you will probably know what it is. It's stuff we already had that we're getting back, but I'm real pumped for that. I'm excited to get those on. But before we do, in the meantime, I want to go ahead and finish out our wiring. We left this kind of 75% done last time because we were waiting on some stuff. Well, we have the stuff. So we have some big 2 and 4 pin connectors for the rear heavy gauge stuff that we needed. We have smaller shrink flex tubing that we needed for the front. You know, these runs where we've got just a couple wires at a time, where the other size we had would just be too big and wouldn't shrink down. We got some other 20 gauge wire. We've got pretty much everything we need to finish out the front harness and our rear harness here, where we just need to terminate it into connectors. So I'm really excited about that. I want to get that knocked out, done and dusted, so that way by the time our other parts get here, we can focus on that. So that's what we're going to get into. I unfortunately have been a little under the weather since we got back from Indiana. It was a long trip, and pretty much as soon as we got back, I got sick, and I'm still not 100%. I've been trying to tinker here and there, but it's been slow going. But I'm trying to get as much done as I can, and hopefully we'll be back to 100% here soon, and we can hammer it down. Bad timing, but we're going to push through it. So anyway, I'm going to quit jibber jabbering. Let's dive into this front harness first, since it's fresh in my memory what needs to be done. Get this thing loomed up, get the connectors on it, get it shrunk, and we'll be done with this guy. So we started pulling out our rolls of shrink flex tubing and sliding them over our different wiring branches. Now, the tricky thing with this is the smaller shrink flex you can use, the easier it's going to be to shrink it down to size and make it nice and tight, and the better it's going to look. But the smaller it is, the harder it is to get it over a certain branch of wire. So it's a really fine balance. You know, you have some scenarios where it's just tight enough, but with the tape or the rod to pull it all through, it's too tight, and then you got to go up a size and hope it shrinks enough. And it's definitely a tedious and time-consuming process. There's a reason that proper auto sport grade harnesses take a long time and cost a lot of money to build, because it is very, very time consuming, let me tell you. All right, we got this thing fully shrink tubed up. Every last little branch is loomed. It takes some time. It's a bit tedious, but really, really happy with the end result. It's always worth it. So now before we shrink it, we need to add our connectors. So everything's gonna get a connector, stuff like this. This starter wire will just get an eyelet. The boost control solenoid here, we're just gonna do a universal 2-pin Deutsche connector, and then we'll put the same connector on the boost control solenoid itself. So then boom, boom, same thing with like the headlights, universal 2-pin here, and then we'll just cut whatever connectors on the headlights that we put in off and put a 2-pin Deutsche on there, and it'll all be simple, serviceable, interchangeable, pretty easy. So we can basically just go ahead and terminate all these connections, and then the harness will be essentially done. We'll just need to, again, put whatever other connector, the other side of the connector on whatever thing. So headlights, intercooler fans, etc. So enough jibber jabber, let's get back to it. So I decided to make the whole harness disconnectable. So even our ground branches, we could have just ran those a little longer and rammed an eyelet on them and just bolted them to ground, and then if we wanted to remove the harness, unbolt them from ground. But I wanted to make those even disconnectable so that basically just a few connections, boom, 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 the whole harness comes out of the way, serviceable, easy to fix, so on and so forth. So we're using just standard off-the-shelf Deutsche connectors, just a very common connector. These are very, very easy to assemble. They're probably the easiest connector you can build, especially when you use the solid contacts and the solid contact crimper that we have, because it's just one ratchet, boom, they slide right in, they pop in, they don't get hung up, they're super easy to pin, super easy to depin. It's a really quick process. If we were doing this with more OE style connectors, this would take a long time. So now that we got all the connectors on, you usually want to do that first before you shrink the tubing, because otherwise it gets kind of harder to manipulate the wires and get them lined up. We can start shrinking it. So putting a lot of heat in the room, it's crazy how long it takes to heat shrink something like this. And the heat gun's going full blast for a solid 15-20 minutes to get it all shrunk down. But boy, is it a satisfying part of the process to see this thing come to life and shrink up all nice and tight. All right, front harness is done. So satisfying how tight that makes everything. I'm glad we were able to get this smaller heat shrink. It really makes the difference on these, little runs with a couple wires in them. So I used this heat shrink tape for the junctions, and it worked pretty well on this side. Like, it does not look amazing, but it doesn't look bad. But on this side, it just did not work well. I think I got a little overzealous trying to use it on these small runs. So I had to add a little bit of tape, which looks pretty ugly too. So that's a little bit of a bummer. But overall, it is what it is. Overall, it looks good. But yeah, so jibber jabber, this one's done. Pretty pumped on that. Yeah, I mean that's the whole front wiring harness right there. Probably weighs 3 pounds, 3 or 4 pounds. Tiny. So super stoked. So one down, one to go. Let's knock out this rear one. Man, I am so glad I ended up getting this kit with the Deutsche solid contacts, because I bought this kit a long time ago. It's a Deutsche Connector Kit, bunch of different sizes, the locks, all of that stuff. But these usually come with these, what are considered stamped contacts. So they're stamped steel. Now these work, they get the job done, but these connectors really aren't designed for this kind of contact. And when you end up crimping it, it doesn't ever really round out perfect, and then it's kind of tricky to install. You have to use a more normal style crimper, which is nice, but it's a multi-step process to crimp one of those contacts versus these, where you just shove it in there, put the wire in, ratchet it, and you're done. So much easier. They're way easier to install, so I'm pretty pumped on that. I had to buy this crimper anyway to do the bulkhead connectors, because these have the solid contacts. And since I had them already, I just bought a contact kit, which works with my connector kit. Bada bing, bada boom, now we're doing it all proper. Got proper Deutsche connectors with the proper solid contacts. And these are, it takes half the time to crimp one of these as it does to crimp one of the stamped ones. So I'm pretty pumped on that. After doing all those connectors on the front there, it would have been real tedious if I didn't have that. So anyway, I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering. These are gonna be a 4-pin connector for the taillights, so that way the grounds will go through the connector and then to ground, so that way if we need to pull the bumper off one plug, we unplug it, we can pull the bumper off with all the taillight wiring attached. We got fan 1, fan 2, water pump, fuel pumps 1 through 4, interior lights, and then we got our grounds for the fans, the water pump, and then our ground for the interior light, all coming out here. These and these are what we need these bigger contact size connectors for. These are going to use these big Johnnies. You can see the size difference there. So anyway, I said I quit jibber jabbering, let's get back to it. So if you saw the episode where we built this rear harness, you might remember me saying, oh, I really shouldn't heat shrink this until we put the connectors on, as I said earlier. But I got a little overzealous. I wanted to see it finished. I wanted to see it all shrunk up, and I wanted it to kind of hold its shape, having all the junctions there and stuff. But it did definitely make this part a lot more difficult. You've just got much less play in the wire to deal with, and these connectors are big. These pins are big. They're a little difficult to pin, but we got it done. All right, well, rear harness is pretty well done and dusted. We've got all of our connectors on, everything terminated. You can see our ground here for our taillights. Got the boot slid over the rear and the front. I'm not going to shrink them until we get it all back in place and know the orientation, because the boot does shrink into a 90. One thing I did screw the pooch on is I forgot to get the locks for these connectors, the little wedge locks that go down in there. I just didn't even think about it when I ordered the connectors since I already had the pins. I just bought the connectors, needed the locks. So we don't have those, but that's okay. We can get those ordered and then it's 2 seconds to pop them in. But with that, harnesses are done, man. I am pumped. I am so happy with how this rear one came out. It is so clean and simple. Everything I wanted it to be. So, that being said, we're waiting on the UPS man. So UPS always comes late to my house. So while we wait for that, for our special surprise that I'm very excited about to finally see everything, we have a couple other little things to do here in the wiring department to keep us busy. I want to basically build our little sub harnesses here. So these are all going to go to a connector. That's why we put a connector on the main harness side. And then we're going to do the same with the grounds. And that way, if we ever need to pull this fuel hat out, we'll disconnect the 2 connectors. We're going to leave all these wires with the hat. That way we don't have to, go take all these nuts off to take all the wires off to pull the hat out. Just make it much more quickly serviceable. So we need to just kind of figure out how we're going to do this orientation. Kind of route them all together. Find the length to terminate them. And then put our connectors on. And then sleeve them. Sleeve them first. Then put our connectors on. You know the deal. Enough jibber jabber. Back to it. So since these runs are so short and all of these are going to essentially slightly different places, there really was no point in trying to loom them together because they would have been together for like an inch or two. So I just went ahead and loomed up the power wires and put heat shrink over the terminal ends just to make sure that they don't short out on the base of the fuel pump hat. And then we went ahead and added our connectors on there. These were a lot easier to pin into the connectors because it's just a bunch of kind of individual wires compared to a bunch of wires tightly bunched up in a harness. So really pretty easy process. Just trying to keep them all organized and keep the links right so that it all looks nice and tidy when we put it back on. So we go ahead and put the power side on first because I'm going to have the ground wires going over the power wires. I just felt like it looked better that way. And it came out decent. All right, check it out. Pretty happy with that. Turned out really good. So now, like I said, you can pull the hat, don't have to worry about it. Just unplug these, boom, boom. Just need to get the locks and we'll be done with those. Pretty much done with the rear harness. I'm real happy with that. So good timing. Our boxes have arrived and I am very anxious and excited to open these and see how everything looks. Now, before we do that, I do have one little project just to tackle myself, and that is I need to get my trailer unhooked. It's been sitting in the driveway hooked to the truck since we got back from Indiana. I've been a slacker, and while we do that, I thought of a really good example to show you how well a product from today's video sponsor works. So the Blaster Corp is the sponsor of today's video, and most of you have probably used PB Blaster and you can attest to the magical powers of it, but I'm telling you this stuff, their Multi-Max synthetic lubricant is equally, if not more magical than PB Blaster itself, which that's saying something if you know how good the OG PB is. This stuff works insanely well. I've been trying to think of a good example to use it on to show you just how well it works. And when I was thinking about going and unhooking the trailer, it dawned on me we've got the perfect thing to test it on. Let me show you. So the most annoying part about unhooking this trailer, aside from manually jacking it up, that's always a bit of a chore, is these feet down here. So they have this deal that you have to pull out and they're spring loaded. So it's difficult to do in general, but it's extra difficult when everything's stiff and corroded. So let me show you what it's like right now. Hopefully this will do this justice. Okay, not easy. I don't know why I haven't done this up until now. So the other cool thing with the Pro Straw on this and the OG PB can is it has flow control. So you can turn the flow down and not just make a mess trying to get lube in something. I'll spray it down in the pin. Alright, let's see. Look at that. I really hope this is doing it. I feel like this is always such a hard thing. It's difficult. We gotta push down. But a million times better. Let's push it down here. Let's lube the actual leg up too. So you can see all the corrosion coming out. Oh yeah, look at that. yeah, anyway, hopefully that really did it justice. Probably still didn't. One of those things, you got to feel it in person. But everything I've tried this stuff on, it has been absolutely incredible. Definitely check it out. I'm telling you, you will not regret it. This stuff works really, really well. It has not disappointed me on anything I've tried it on so far. It literally makes everything come to life like new. So that being said, I'm gonna go move this trailer and then we'll open these boxes. But huge shout out to the Blaster Corp for sponsoring this video. Awesome company to work with, awesome products. I've been using their stuff for over a decade. So it's always really cool to work with them and work with such a good, solid product. So anyway, let me go knock out my chore real quick and then let's open these boxes. All right, trailer's unhooked, back in its home. Perfect timing because it is about to storm. Typical Florida. Now that we got the not so fun stuff done, we get to do the fun stuff. I like to knock out, if I got stuff hanging over my head, I like to knock it out before I do something enjoyable, like unpackage all this goodness that we're about to see. So let's do it. It's time. All right, so as some of you already know, we sent our exhaust away a month or so ago now to get a service done for heat management. So when I built this turbo kit, heat management was one of the biggest things I took into account. Heat management, serviceability, trying to keep all the hot stuff away from the cool stuff, you know, making places to route lines where they wouldn't have to come super close to the exhaust, but inevitably you end up with hot stuff, cold stuff. So heat management is going to be the biggest priority. If we can keep the underhood temps down, keep the heat in the exhaust, it's just going to make our lives way easier. The car should run cooler. It'll make more power because the heat's going where it's supposed to go, not just zooting out all over the engine bay. So we decided to take the splurge and get this service done. So this is from a company called Header Shield. So they have a service where you send in your exhaust components and they wrap them with this space age material that has an air barrier and all sorts of stuff built into it. And this stuff drops temps like 600 to 700 degrees. They've done dyno tests, same car, same everything, just put the probe right up against the non-shielded portion and then on the shield, and it was a 600 degree difference. So this was the stuff, Jonathan Hurst actually is the one who recommended this to me. And once I saw it, I was like, hey, that's it. That's gonna make all the difference in the world on this thing. So we went ahead and got literally everything done by them. Literally everything. Look at that. Oh man. This is like better than Christmas morning. Especially because I built all this stuff. Like seeing it all wrapped like this, it makes it look so professional. It looks like some factory built piece. Look at that. Hershield.com, dude, this is sick. I've been so excited to get this stuff back. I know a lot of my friends are real curious about getting this done too, and they're excited to see what the end product looked like. But whew, man, this is gonna look so cool in there. And obviously it's gonna do the job. That's the reason we did it. But hey, if they make it look snazzy, they make it look snazzy. Whew. Look at that. Man, that is nice. We even went so far as to get the wastegates and the wastegate tubes done. Look at that, man. I am extremely impressed with this. You see the pictures, but seeing it come to life on my setup is, I don't know, it really puts it in perspective. All right, well, here it is. Man, I could not be happier with that. They did an absolutely killer job. I cannot imagine how much time this took to do. So this is sick. Like I said, as soon as I heard about this, for me, there was no other option. Again, heat management, especially on this car, a Turbo LS, you know, Turbo LS drift car at that. I like my cars to run as cool as possible. I hate cars that get hot after one lap or two. But in general, heat management is crucial. If I had known about this when I was working on rebuilding the Zafiro, I would have done the same thing to its exhaust, because even with me building it as far away from the brake booster as I can, I've already been melting reservoirs and stuff. Heat just wreaks havoc, and especially on a turbo system. You know, turbo headers, downpipes, exhaust housings, they get hot. And for me, pretty much all the other heat management options kind of suck. You know, like ceramic coating doesn't really work that great in my experience. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't do as much as you would want it to do. Heat wrap seems to work okay, but I absolutely despise header wrap, because one, the car becomes a nightmare to work on. If you've got to touch anything, you got to reach down here and undo this line, and your arm brushes past that heat wrap, it gets in your skin, it's all itchy, that fiberglass residue, terrible. Not to mention, if you ever have an oil leak and it gets on your header wrap, it is impossible to get that oil out. The RX-7 that I had header wrap. I had a leak that I was chasing. I finally found it, but even with the leak fixed, the car kept catching on fire because there was so much oil just stuck in the header wrap, and no matter how much I tried, I could not clean it out. I ended up going in there and cutting it all out, which was a nightmare. I was itchy for a week. So I'm totally against header wrap. I hate it. It ends up falling apart and disintegrating anyway. It's just not the move. So anyway, this is obviously on the pricier end of your options, but in my opinion, if you can swing it, this is absolutely worth it. I may still even go back and do this to the Zafiro, because I know it'll make a world of difference. But this car, man, it was a no-brainer for me. With as much time as we put into this kit and planning everything out, and as important as this is going to be with how much stuff we have going on in here, power steering lines, coolant lines, wiring, this was really kind of, to me, this was kind of a make or break it thing. You know, this could be the difference between going out there and doing lap after lap and the car staying cool, and this thing being a one lap wonder where it wants to overheat after a lap because there's just so much dang heat. And that's always been my biggest gripe against turbo LSs, and why I was hesitant to do this, because the heat, you got a lot of exhaust parts running back and forth, so anything we can do to negate that is good. So anyway, I'm really pumped. If you're interested in this stuff, go to headershield.com. Check it out. You can email them for a quote. They basically go off the dimensions and then kind of what it is, right? So something simple like this exhaust piece, just straight 4-inch with minimal stuff, is cheaper to do than something more elaborate like this header. But they do NA headers. They do all sorts of stuff. So definitely check them out. I'm glad Jonathan Hurst told me about him. I never would have known this was an option if he hadn't said something. So, okay. That being said, we've got all our clamps, we got all our parts, we got all our pieces, we got our EGT probes. It's time to put this all back together. Crossing my fingers that it all still fits. We've also done a lot of work without any of the exhaust parts here while they were away on vacation. And I'm curious to see how everything fits together now that we put the exhaust back in. Just been doing this all off pictures and measurements of where things were. So this is a big moment. This is a really big moment. I'm a little nervous. If it goes back together well, great. If not, we may have to revise some things. So I'm gonna go jibber jabber and let's put this thing back together. So surprisingly enough, getting the headers on is actually the easier part of this process. The hardest part is really getting the exhaust housing back on and getting the Y pipe on. Now, since we had done some of this stuff without any of this here, we found out some things don't fit, including our oil feed block. So we had to ditch that. We're gonna have to find another solution. There's just not enough room for it with the turbo housing, but we managed to get the housing on and we managed to get the Y pipe in place. That thing can be a bit of a struggle and a bit of a fight to get on, but it all lined back up. We got it all on, and now we just needed to toss on the down pipe. Now, unfortunately, with the way we set up the intercooler and the oil cooler and all this stuff that we've built since the exhaust has been gone, there's no way to snake the downpipe in there without taking all of that whole front end off. Now, luckily we made it serviceable. It's easy to get off, but it took a little fighting with the downpipe to get it past everything, but we got it all on. All right, well, here's what it looks like so far. This is most of the shiny new stuff put back on. We did obviously have to disassemble it a little more than I was hoping. The new intercooler mount design does not give you room to put the downpipe in like the old one did, with it being mounted in the bash bar. So I tried, it was close, not quite enough though. So we had to pull all that off. So we still got to put the very last bit of the exhaust on that goes down by the trans, but I think I want to go ahead and try to get the front end assembled again and get the wastegates back on, see what this looks like as a complete package. But this is what it looks like right now before we kind of cover a lot of it up with all the other junk. Man, it looks good. I mean, for as much as it does, you know, and that's the purpose of it, I think it looks sweet. It just really ties everything together. All the different materials, different sizes, pie cuts, no pie cuts, it all blends into one nice shiny package. So anyway, I'm gonna quit jibber jabber and I'm gonna get back to it, get this thing buttoned up. So as we start slamming this thing back together, it's kind of fun to see how all of this stuff goes together and comes apart. When you fabricate all these odds and ends and you put things in different places and line routing and all this stuff, when you build it, it's one thing, but then when it comes time to take it apart, it's always interesting to see if you did your job right and you made it serviceable, which, as most of you know, that has been really my biggest priority on this build, is making this car as serviceable as we can, especially for a big old turbo LS shoved in a Corvette. You know, there's only so much you can do, but we tried to do our best. So I wanted to hammer this out, get this thing put back together and see what it looked like as a complete unit. It's been sitting kind of unfinished with all the exhaust off it for a month or so now, and I wanted to see it as a complete, close to running and driving package. We're getting there. All right, well, that's it. It's officially all back together. Man, I'm pumped on that. It came out so good. They did such a great job on this. So the only thing I didn't put back on is the next part of the downpipe, which this didn't necessarily even need to be shielded, but it would keep the trans cooler, and there's a couple little things that are kind of in this area. So I'm pretty confident this will fit back on. It's tricky if you've taken the downpipe off. You really need to leave it loose and then get that flange lined up with that piece, kind of line them all up at the same time and then tighten them all down. So it's really a two-person operation. So we'll hold off on that. No real reason to toss it on right now, but the bulk of it is on, and it looks so good. What a drastic difference. And it just feels good in general to have the whole exhaust system back on this car. You know, it's been kind of naked for a while we worked on all this other stuff. So to have it back and to have this part of the process done, I'm so glad we bit the bullet, took the time to do that, because that's going to make a world of difference. A lot of good progress. Wiring essentially done. Exhaust shielding done. Exhaust back on. Front end back on. Oh, and as a bonus, our jigging of the intercooler worked out. Everything lines back up just fine, just as if we built it with the exhaust on there. So I'm real pumped on that too. But yeah, that being said, we are out of time, so we are going to be hammering down on this thing, man. I want to do everything in my power to get this car done by the next round of clutch kickers. I'm tired of using the Miata. It was fun at first, but after the 50K, man, just getting rolled for the first time. It's the first time I've put everything in it lately, you know, everything it had, and it just still wasn't enough. Normally it's like, I could have jumped them better, I could have put a little more grip in it, whatever. It was like, no, there wasn't much more I could have done there, and that really makes me want to get this car done. So we're gonna try our best, but for now we're not gonna do anything. We're gonna call it. So I'll just see you guys next time, but for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.